One choice. One moment. One love story. Welcome to When He Chose Her. Enjoy the story. Sometimes, the people we ignore are the ones who see us most clearly. The rain came down in quiet sheets, not loud enough to scare the city, just steady enough to make people walk faster and look down. Inside a small diner tucked between a laundromat and a closed hardware store, Clara Bennett moved like she always did. Quick, precise, almost invisible. Plates balanced on her arm. Coffee refilled before anyone asked. Smiles offered but never forced. 8 hours into her shift, her feet ached, but her eyes stayed calm. They always did. Table 6 needs a refill, her coworker muttered, barely looking up from her phone. Clara nodded, already moving. Outside, through the fogged glass window, she noticed a figure sitting alone on the bench near the bus stop. An old woman. Thin coat. No umbrella. Just sitting there, still, as if the rain didn't belong to her. Clara paused, just for a second, then kept walking. Orders didn't stop because someone was cold outside. Life didn't work that way. 10 minutes later, she was back at the counter, wiping her hands on a clean towel when she glanced out again. The woman hadn't moved. Not an inch. The rain traced lines down her face, but she didn't wipe it away. She didn't react at all. That was when Clara noticed something else. The woman's eyes weren't following anything. Not the passing cars. Not the flickering streetlight. Nothing. They were open, but distant. Still. Clara exhaled softly. Don't even think about it, her coworker said without looking up. We're not a charity. Clara didn't respond. She just reached for a takeout container. Soup. The last of it. Still warm. She grabbed a plastic spoon, hesitated, then added a slice of bread from the kitchen. Paid for it herself. Like she always did. The bell above the diner door chimed as she stepped outside. The rain hit her immediately, cold and sharp, soaking through her sleeves in seconds. She walked straight to the bench. Ma'am. Her voice was gentle. The woman didn't react. Clara stepped closer, crouching slightly. I brought you something warm. A pause. Then the woman turned her head, slowly toward the sound. Her movements were careful, measured, like she was listening to the space instead of seeing it. Is that for me? Her voice was soft, uncertain. Clara smiled, even though the woman couldn't see it. Yes, ma'am. It's just soup. Nothing fancy. The woman reached out, her hand searching the air for a moment before Clara gently placed the container into it. Their fingers touched briefly. The woman's hand was cold. Thank you, she whispered, holding the container like it was something fragile, something important. Clara sat beside her for a second, ignoring the rain soaking into her uniform. You shouldn't be out here alone in this weather, she said quietly. The woman gave a small, almost amused smile. Sometimes, you need to feel the world again. Clara tilted her head slightly. That wasn't the answer she expected. Do you have someone you can call? She asked. The woman paused, then shook her head. I have a son, she said. Very busy. Very important. There was no bitterness in her voice. Just distance. Clara let out a small breath, glancing at the street. Cars rushed by. People passed without slowing. No one noticed them. Well, Clara said gently, right now, you've got me. The woman smiled again. This time, it stayed a little longer. Inside the diner, someone knocked on the window, gesturing sharply. Clara looked back. Her manager. Not happy. Of course. She stood up slowly. I have to go back to work, she said. But I'll check on you, okay? The woman nodded, holding the soup close. You're very kind, she said softly. Clara shook her head. No, she replied, stepping back into the rain. Just doing what anyone should. But as she walked back inside, dripping water onto the tile floor, her manager's voice already rising, somewhere across the city, in a glass office high above everything. Ethan Caldwell glanced at his phone for the third time in 5 minutes. A missed call, from a number he hadn't saved, but knew by heart. He stared at it, then turned the screen face down. Continue, he said coldly, as if nothing had happened. And far below, in the quiet rain, the only person who had answered that call didn't even know who she had just helped. Clara pushed the diner door open with her shoulder, the bell above it chiming louder than usual. Or maybe it just felt that way because every eye turned toward her soaked uniform and dripping hair, water pooling beneath her shoes as she stepped back onto the tile floor and reached for a towel, without saying a word, her manager already walking toward her with that tight expression she knew too well. The kind that meant a lecture was coming before she could even explain. "We are not giving away food," he said sharply, his voice low but firm enough to carry, and Clara nodded once. Calm, steady, not defensive, not apologizing either, just listening the way she always did. "I paid for it," she replied softly, placing a few bills on the counter, exact change, already prepared, and for a moment the manager hesitated, thrown off by the quiet certainty in her tone, then exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. "You cannot save everyone," he muttered before turning away, but Clara did not respond because she never tried to argue something she knew could not be explained in words. She simply picked up a fresh notepad, tied her apron tighter, and stepped back in emotion as if nothing had happened, because that was her way. Keep moving, keep working, keep helping when no one was looking, even if it cost her, especially if it cost her. And yet her eyes kept drifting back to the window between orders, just quick glances, making sure the woman was still there, still holding the container, still okay, and each time she looked, she saw the same quiet image, the old woman sitting still, eating slowly, carefully, like every spoonful mattered, like warmth was something she had not felt in a long time. And something about that made Clara's chest tighten just a little, not pain, just awareness, the kind that stayed with you even when you tried to focus on something else. And across the city, far above the streets that carried that same rain in quieter echoes, Ethan Caldwell stood in front of a wall of glass that overlooked everything he had built, the skyline stretching out in perfect lines, controlled, predictable, exactly the way he liked it, his reflection. Sharp against the night, suit immaculate, posture still, but his phone sat on the table behind him, face down, silent, and yet not ignored, not entirely, because every few seconds his attention drifted back to it, not visibly, not enough for anyone in the room to notice, but enough that it pulled at him in a way he did not like, a disruption, a small fracture in the rhythm he had mastered. "The Tokyo deal needs your approval," his assistant said carefully, placing a folder on the table, and Ethan nodded without turning. "Send it," he replied, voice even, controlled, but when the assistant left, he walked back slowly, picked up the phone, and stared at the screen for a moment longer than necessary. The missed call still there, the number still familiar, and for a second, just a second, something shifted behind his eyes, something quieter than guilt, heavier than inconvenience. But he locked it away the way he always did, placing the phone back down, because emotions did not build empires, discipline did, and he had chosen that path a long time ago. Meanwhile, back at the diner, the rush slowed as the evening settled into something softer, the noise fading into low conversations and the occasional clink of dishes, and Clara finally had a moment to step outside again, this time with an umbrella she borrowed from behind the counter. The rain easing but not gone, the air colder now, sharper, and when she reached the bench, the woman was still there, but the soup container was empty, held loosely in her hands. "Was it okay?" Clara asked gently, and the woman smiled, a small, genuine smile that seemed to come from somewhere deep. "It was perfect," she said, and Clara nodded, relieved in a way she could not quite explain, then hesitated before sitting down again, just for a minute. "Do you want me to call someone for you?" she asked, softer this time, and the woman tilted her head slightly, as if considering the idea not logically but emotionally. "He would come," she said after a pause, "but he would not understand why I left." And Clara watched her carefully, rain tapping lightly against the umbrella above them. "Maybe he just needs a reason," she said, almost thinking out loud, and the woman let out a quiet breath, something between a laugh and a sigh. "He has everything," she murmured, "except time." And Clara looked down at her hands, then back at the street, where people passed by without noticing them again, the same pattern repeating, the same invisible lines separating lives. "Sometimes," Clara said slowly, "people think they have everything because no one ever tells them what they are missing." And the woman turned toward her voice again, that same distant gaze, but this time, there was something else behind it, something warmer, something curious. "And you would tell him?" she asked, and Clara gave a small smile, almost amused. "I would probably get fired first," she admitted quietly, and for the first time, the woman laughed, a soft, genuine sound that cut through the rain like light, unexpected and bright. and somewhere far above the city, Ethan Caldwell stood alone in his office, the skyline no longer sharp in his eyes, his reflection blurred slightly against the glass, and without fully realizing why, he picked up his phone again, his thumb hovering for just a moment before pressing the call button, because something, somewhere, had shifted, even if he did not understand it yet. The call connected on the third ring, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, just the quiet sound of rain on one end and controlled silence on the other, as if both were measuring the distance between them in something deeper than miles. "You usually do not call back," the woman said softly, her voice steady but carrying something unspoken beneath it, and Clara, sitting just a few inches away, froze without meaning to, her eyes shifting slightly, not trying to listen but unable to ignore the sudden shift in the air, the weight of a voice that did not belong to this street, did not belong to this quiet bench. "I was in a meeting," Ethan replied, his tone calm, practiced, the kind of voice that could close deals and end arguments in seconds. But there was a pause after it, small, almost invisible, like a crack in glass that only showed under certain light. "You have been in meetings for years," the woman answered. Not accusing, not angry, just stating something that had settled into truth over time. And Clara looked down at her hands, suddenly aware that she was sitting in the middle of something far bigger than a simple conversation, something she should probably step away from. But she did not move, not yet, because the woman's hand found her sleeve gently, a light touch, asking her to stay without saying the words. "Where are you?" Ethan asked after a second, his voice quieter now, more focused, and the woman tilted her head slightly, as if listening to the rain for the answer instead of giving it directly. "Somewhere simple," she said, and for the first time, Ethan's expression shifted, just slightly, standing alone in his office, the city lights reflecting off the glass behind him, sharp lines softening as something unfamiliar moved through him. "Send me the location," he said, more firmly now, control returning to his voice, but the woman smiled, a small, knowing smile. "If I do, you will send a car, a driver, someone else," she said. And Clara felt that sentence more than she understood it, because she had seen that pattern before, in different forms, different people, always the same distance disguised as care. "Then tell me where you are," Ethan insisted, and this time there was something else in his tone, not authority, not entirely, something closer to urgency, and the woman turned her face slightly toward Clara again, as if including her in a decision she had not asked to be part of. "I am with someone kind," she said slowly. "Someone who did not ask who I was before helping me." And Clara blinked, caught off guard, unsure what to do with that kind of recognition, while on the other end, Ethan went still, completely still, the words settling into him in a way numbers and contracts never did. "Who?" he asked, quieter now, and Clara instinctively shook her head, even though he could not see her, but the woman's hand tightened slightly on her sleeve, not forcing, just steady. "Her name is Clara," she said gently, and there was a silence that followed, longer this time, heavier, because something had just shifted without permission, without preparation, and Ethan closed his eyes for a brief second, just one, before opening them again, sharper now, more present. "Stay where you are," he said, not as a command, but as a request he was not used to making, and the woman nodded, even though he could not see it. "I will," she replied, then lowered the phone slowly, ending the call without another word, the screen going dark in her hand, the rain continuing its quiet rhythm around them. And Clara finally exhaled, a breath she did not realize she had been holding. "That was your son," she said softly, not a question, just a realization settling into place, and the woman smiled again, something warmer now, something almost proud. "Yes," she answered, and Clara looked out at the street, then back at her, trying to connect the pieces, the quiet woman on a wet bench and the voice that carried entire rooms, entire companies. "He sounds important," Clara said carefully, and the woman let out a soft laugh, shaking her head just slightly. "He thinks he is," she replied, and Clara could not help but smile at that, a small, genuine moment breaking through the weight of everything else. "Well," Clara said after a second, standing slowly, "then he is about to learn something important too." And the woman tilted her head again, curious. "What is that?" she asked, and Clara glanced down at her, then back toward the diner, where her manager was probably already watching the clock. That sometimes, Clara said quietly, being there matters more than being powerful. And the woman's smile deepened, not because the words were new, but because someone else had finally said them out loud. And across the city, Ethan Caldwell was already moving, his jacket in hand, his assistant calling after him with questions he did not answer, because for the first time in a very long time, something outside his control was pulling him forward, not with force, but with something quieter, something he did not fully understand yet, but could not ignore. The rain had softened into a quiet mist by the time Clara stepped back inside, but something in the air had changed, something she could not quite name, as if the world outside had shifted slightly without asking permission. And even as she moved through her tables again, refilling coffee, clearing plates, her attention kept drifting back to the door, to the street beyond it, to the woman still sitting patiently under the shelter of the umbrella she had left behind. And every few seconds she caught herself listening for something, not a sound exactly, more like an arrival she did not yet understand. And across the city, that arrival was already in motion. Ethan Caldwell moved through the underground garage with a pace that did not match his usual control, his driver already stepping forward with the car door open. But Ethan shook his head slightly. "I will drive," he said, and the driver hesitated, surprised, because that was not something Ethan did. Not anymore. Not when time could be managed, delegated, optimized. But Ethan did not wait for a response. He took the keys, slid into the driver's seat, and for a moment just sat there, hands on the wheel, staring ahead as the engine came to life, the city, stretching out in front of him not as a map of opportunities, but as something unfamiliar, something unscripted. And when he finally pulled out into traffic, it was not with urgency, not reckless, but with a quiet determination that felt different from anything he had known. Back at the diner, Clara placed a check on table 4, her movements automatic, practiced, but her eyes flickered again to the window. And this time she saw it. A car pulling up across the street, not flashy, not loud, but unmistakably precise in its presence. The kind of car that did not belong here, not between a laundromat and a dimly lit diner. And something in her chest tightened, not fear, just awareness. As if a story she had accidentally stepped into was about to turn a page. She wiped her hands on her apron, glanced once at her manager who was busy with the register, then quietly stepped toward the door again, the bell chiming softly as she pushed it open. The air cooler now, the rain almost gone, and across the street, the car door opened. Ethan stepped out, his posture still, controlled, but his eyes searching, not scanning the area like a businessman assessing value, but searching like someone trying to find something he had almost lost. His gaze moved quickly, then stopped, fixed on the bench, on the figure sitting there. And for a moment, everything else disappeared, the noise of the street, the passing cars, the distant lights. All of it faded into something distant, and Clara watched from a few steps away, unnoticed, as he crossed the street. Each step measured but not hesitant, and when he reached the bench, he did not speak immediately. He just stood there, looking at the woman, really looking at her, as if seeing her for the first time in years, maybe longer. And the woman tilted her head slightly, sensing him before he said anything. "You came yourself," she said softly, and Ethan exhaled, a breath that carried more than just the distance he had traveled. "Yes," he replied, and for a second, his voice lost its usual edge, not weak, just human, and Clara felt something shift again, watching from where she stood, not part of this moment, but somehow connected to it. And the woman smiled, reaching out slightly, and Ethan stepped closer, taking her hand carefully, almost cautiously, like it was something fragile he had not held in a long time. "You should not be out here," he said, quieter now, and the woman's smile deepened just a little. "And yet, here I am," she answered, and there was no defiance in her tone, just truth. And Ethan closed his eyes briefly, just for a second, then opened them again, sharper now, more present. "Come home," he said, and it sounded less like a command and more like a request he was still learning how to make. And the woman tilted her head again, then slowly shook it. "Not yet," she said, and Ethan frowned slightly, confusion flickering across his expression, because that was not an answer he was used to receiving, not from her, not from anyone. Why? he asked, and the woman turned her face slightly toward Clara's direction. Though her eyes did not see her, somehow she still included her in the moment. Because I am not finished learning, she said gently, and Ethan followed the direction of her gaze, his eyes landing on Clara for the first time, really seeing her now, standing a few feet away, damp uniform, hands loosely at her sides, not trying to interrupt, not trying to explain, just there, and for a moment, the world narrowed again. Just three people, one quiet street, one unspoken connection, and Clara met his gaze, steady, not intimidated, not impressed, just present, and something in that look unsettled him more than any boardroom ever had, because it did not ask for anything, did not expect anything, it simply saw him, and he was not sure he liked how that felt, or maybe he was not sure he was ready for it, and Clara broke the silence first, her voice calm, respectful but not submissive. She was cold, she said simply, and Ethan nodded once, absorbing that, not arguing, not questioning, just accepting it as fact, because in that moment, it was the only thing that mattered, and the woman between them smiled softly, as if watching something unfold that neither of them fully understood yet, something quiet, something inevitable. The silence between them did not feel empty. It felt full, like something unspoken was slowly taking shape in the space they all shared, and Ethan kept his eyes on Clara for a moment longer than necessary, not out of judgment, not out of curiosity alone, but because something about her steadiness unsettled the patterns he relied on, the way she stood there without trying to impress him, without adjusting her posture or her tone, as if his presence changed nothing for her, and that was new, unfamiliar, almost disarming. You helped her, he said finally, his voice even, but softer than before, and Clara nodded once, simple, direct. She needed something warm, she replied, and that was all, no explanation, no attempt to justify herself, just a fact placed between them, and Ethan glanced down at his mother, still holding her hand, her fingers resting lightly in his, and he realized something quietly uncomfortable. She looked more at ease sitting on that worn bench than she had in the last few times he had seen her in his own home, surrounded by everything money could provide, and the realization stayed with him longer than he expected. You should not have been out here alone, he said again, this time to her, but it carried less certainty, less control, and she smiled faintly, turning her face slightly toward him. And yet, someone found me, she answered, and Ethan did not respond right away, because the sentence did not accuse him, but it did not excuse him either. It simply existed, and Clara shifted her weight slightly, sensing that this moment did not belong to her entirely. But she did not leave, not yet, because something about the woman's earlier touch, that quiet request to stay, still held her there, and the street around them continued moving as if nothing significant was happening. Cars passing, headlights sliding across the pavement, people walking by with their own lives unfolding, unaware that something small and quiet was changing direction right in front of them. Do you work here? Ethan asked after a moment, his gaze returning to Clara, and she nodded. Yes, she said, and he glanced briefly at the diner behind her, then back at her again, taking in the details he would normally ignore, the damp fabric of her uniform, the faint tremor in her hands from the cold she had not mentioned, the way she stood slightly angled toward his mother, as if ready to respond before being asked, and something about that arrangement, that quiet readiness, felt more intentional than anything he had seen all day. You paid for the food, he said, not asking, and Clara gave a small nod. It was not much, she replied, and Ethan's brow tightened slightly, not in disagreement, but in recognition of something he could not measure in numbers. It was not your responsibility, he said, and Clara looked at him directly, her expression calm, unshaken. It was not yours either, she answered, and for a second, the air shifted again, not tense, not hostile, just real, and Ethan held her gaze, surprised not by the words, but by the way they were delivered, without challenge, without fear, just truth, and his mother let out a soft, amused breath between them, as if she had been waiting for that exact moment. She is right, she said gently, and Ethan looked down at her, then back at Clara, and for the first time, something close to a smile touched the corner of his expression, not fully formed, but there, You are not afraid of losing your job, he said, and Clara's lips curved slightly, just enough to suggest humor beneath her calm. I am, she admitted. I just do not think about it first. And that answer stayed with him, settling deeper than he expected, because it did not reject fear. It simply refused to let it lead, and that was something he had not heard in a very long time. Come, he said after a pause, turning slightly toward his car, his tone shifting back towards something more familiar, but still carrying that quiet change. Both of you, he added, and Clara blinked, caught slightly off guard. I still have a shift, she replied, glancing back toward the diner, where her manager was now clearly watching from behind the glass, arms crossed, expression unreadable, and Ethan followed her gaze, then reached into his pocket, pulling out a card without looking at it, extending it toward her with a natural ease that suggested this solved most problems in his world. Then take the night off, he said, and Clara looked at the card, then back at him, her expression unchanged, and after a second, she did something he was not used to. She did not take it. That is not how it works, she said quietly, and for a moment, Ethan just stood there, card still extended, as if the concept itself had failed to land. Then slowly, he lowered his hand, not offended, just adjusting, recalibrating, and his mother smiled again, that same knowing warmth returning. Then we will wait, she said, softly, and Ethan looked at her, surprised. Wait? He repeated, and she nodded. For her shift to end, she added, and Clara felt a small, unexpected laugh rise in her chest, not loud, just enough to break through the seriousness of the moment. And for the first time since stepping out into the rain, something lighter entered the space between them, something that did not belong to power or obligation, just time, shared, unplanned, and quietly significant. The diner felt smaller somehow as Clara stepped back inside, not because the space had changed, but because her awareness had, every movement sharper now, every sound more defined, the low hum of conversation, the clink of silverware, the quiet scrape of chairs against tile, all of it grounding her in a place that suddenly felt like the edge of something larger, something waiting just beyond the glass doors. And as she tied her apron again, her manager approached, arms still crossed, expression unreadable but no longer sharp, just curious. Those people outside, he said, lowering his voice slightly. You know them? And Clara shook her head. Honest, simple. No, she replied, reaching for a coffee pot. I just met her tonight, and he studied her for a moment longer, then glanced toward the window, where the silhouette of Ethan's car and the faint outline of two figures waiting could still be seen. Well, he muttered, they look like they belong somewhere else, and Clara paused just briefly, then continued pouring coffee into a waiting cup. Maybe they do, she said quietly, just not tonight. And that answer seemed to settle something he had not quite asked, because he nodded once and stepped away without another word, leaving her to move through the rest of her shift with the same steady rhythm she always had. But now, every few minutes, her eyes drifted back to the door, not out of distraction, but out of awareness, because waiting changes how time moves, stretches it, reshapes it. And outside, Ethan stood beside his mother, the umbrella now resting lightly above them. Though the rain had almost stopped, his posture still composed, but his attention no longer divided. No phone in his hand, no assistant speaking in the background, just the quiet presence of someone he had not fully seen in years. And for once, he did not rush it, did not try to solve it. He simply stayed, and that, more than anything, felt unfamiliar. You are uncomfortable, his mother said softly, not as a question, and Ethan let out a small breath, not defensive, just acknowledging. I am not used to waiting, he admitted, glancing briefly toward the diner, where Clara moved behind the glass, a blur of quiet efficiency, and his mother smiled faintly. Then this is a good place to start, she replied, and Ethan did not argue, because something about that moment made arguing feel unnecessary. And inside, Clara finished clearing her last table, stacking plates carefully, wiping the surface with slow, deliberate movements. Her shift almost over now, the clock above the register inching closer to the hour, and when she finally untied her apron, folding it neatly before placing it behind the counter, her coworker raised an eyebrow. Your friend still out there? She asked with a hint of teasing. and Clara gave a small smile. "I do not think they are my friends," she said, and her coworker laughed lightly. "Well, they are. Definitely not my customers," she replied, glancing out the window, and Clara followed her gaze for a moment, then reached for her coat, slipping it on with a quiet exhale, as if preparing to step into something she did not fully understand yet. And when she pushed the door open again, the night air felt different, not colder, just clearer, and Ethan looked up immediately, his attention locking onto her in a way that felt intentional now, not accidental, and for a second, no one spoke. The three of them standing there in a quiet triangle of unspoken connection. Then Clara broke it gently. "I am done," she said, her voice calm, and Ethan nodded once, as if that was all he had been waiting for. "Good," he replied, then paused, adjusting something in his tone, softening it just slightly. "Thank you for staying," he added, and Clara blinked, not expecting that, because gratitude from someone like him did not sound the way she imagined it would. It sounded quieter, less certain, more real, and she gave a small nod in return. "She asked me to," she said, glancing briefly at his mother, who smiled with that same quiet warmth, and Ethan followed that glance, then looked back at Clara again, studying her for a moment, not as a problem to solve, not as a variable to calculate, but as a person he did not yet understand, and something about that uncertainty did not bother him as much as it should have. "Come," he said after a moment, gesturing toward the car again, but this time, there was no card, no assumption, just an invitation, and Clara hesitated for a second, not out of fear, but out of habit, because her world did not usually shift this quickly. But then she looked at the woman beside him, still holding on to that quiet sense of trust, and she stepped forward, closing the distance between them, not because she had to, but because something in that moment felt right. And as the car door opened, and the three of them moved toward a place none of them had planned to go just hours before, the city around them continued as it always did, unaware that something small, something quiet, had already begun to change everything. The car moved quietly through the city, not rushed, not delayed, just steady, the kind of motion that allowed silence to settle naturally between people who were still learning how to exist in the same space. And Clara sat in the back seat beside Ethan's mother, her hands folded loosely in her lap, her eyes drifting between the passing streetlights and the reflection in the window, while Ethan drove without speaking, his focus forward, but his awareness stretched wider than usual, as if he could feel every small shift behind him without turning around. And for a while, no one felt the need to fill the quiet, because some moments do not need words, they need time. And time was something Ethan was only beginning to understand again. "You drive differently," his mother said softly after a few minutes, her voice light, almost teasing, and Ethan glanced at her briefly through the mirror, a faint hint of something unguarded crossing his expression. "How would you know?" he asked, and she smiled, tilting her head slightly. "I can hear it," she replied, and Clara could not help the small smile that touched her lips, because somehow, that answer made sense in a way logic could not explain, and Ethan let out a quiet breath, something close to a laugh, but not quite, and the car continued forward, weaving through streets that slowly shifted from narrow and worn to wide and polished, the buildings rising taller, the lights brighter, the world changing without announcement, and Clara noticed it, of course she did, but she did not react, did not comment, because she had learned a long time ago that places do not define people as much as people believe they do. And yet, as the car finally slowed in front of a building that did not need to announce its value because it carried it in every detail, every line, every quiet reflection of light across glass and stone, Clara felt something pause inside her, not hesitation, not doubt, just awareness of the distance she had just crossed in a matter of minutes. And Ethan stepped out first, moving around to open the back door, not out of habit, but out of intention, and when Clara noticed, she hesitated for half a second before stepping out, her eyes meeting his briefly, and there it was again, that same quiet exchange, no words, no expectations, just recognition, and his mother followed, her hand finding Clara's arm naturally, as if the connection between them had already settled into something familiar, and together, they moved inside. The lobby warm and quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from space rather than absence, and the staff at the desk straightened slightly as Ethan entered, their posture shifting with immediate recognition, but Ethan did not acknowledge it. Not the way he usually would. His attention remained elsewhere, divided in a way that felt new. And as they stepped into the elevator, the doors closing softly behind them, Clara felt the shift again, not in the space, but in the dynamic, because now, there was nowhere else to look, nowhere else to move, just the three of them in a small, enclosed moment, rising slowly above the city, and Ethan pressed the button without looking. His movements automatic, but his mind clearly not. "You do not have to stay," he said after a moment, his voice quieter than before, directed at Clara but not demanding, and she looked at him, steady as always. "I know," she replied, and that was all. No explanation, no justification, just the truth. And his mother smiled softly beside her, sensing the shift between them, something subtle, something that did not need to be named yet. And when the elevator doors opened, the space beyond them unfolded in quiet elegance, wide windows, soft lighting. Everything in its place, everything controlled, and Clara stepped inside without slowing, without staring, without letting the space define her reaction, and Ethan noticed that. Of course he did, because he noticed everything. But this felt different. This was not observation. This was something closer to respect, something forming without permission. "Sit," he said, gesturing toward the living area, but again, it sounded less like instruction and more like invitation, and Clara sat, not cautiously, not carelessly, just naturally, as if the room did not intimidate her, and that unsettled him more than he expected, because most people reacted to spaces like this, adjusted themselves to fit it, but she did not change, not even slightly, and his mother settled beside her, her hand resting lightly over Clara's for a moment, a silent acknowledgement that carried more meaning than words could hold, and Ethan stood there for a second longer than necessary, watching them. The scene quiet, simple, but somehow more significant than any deal he had closed that day, and for the first time in a long time, he did not feel the need to control what happened next. He just stepped forward, joining them, not as a man above them, not as a man directing them, but simply as someone present, and that difference, small as it seemed, changed everything. The city outside seemed quieter from this height, not because the noise had disappeared, but because distance softened everything into something manageable, something almost peaceful, and Clara stood near the window, her reflection faint against the glass, her posture relaxed but aware, while Ethan remained a few steps behind her, not speaking, not interrupting the silence he was only beginning to understand, and for a moment, nothing moved between them except the slow rhythm of breath and distant lights, until Clara turned slightly, her voice calm. "It is different up here," and Ethan nodded once, his tone quieter than before. "It is supposed to be," he said, then paused. "But it does not always feel that way." And Clara studied him briefly before stepping away from the window, her movements natural, unforced. "Places do not change how people feel," she said softly. "They just make it easier to hide it." And the words settled into the space with a quiet weight, and Ethan did not answer immediately, because something inside him had already begun to shift, something slower, deeper than thought, and his mother sat nearby, her presence calm, her expression peaceful, as if she could feel the change without needing to see it. "You always build higher walls," she said gently, "and then wonder why it feels lonely." And Ethan glanced at her, then back at Clara, and for the first time, he did not try to defend it, did not explain it, he simply stood there, letting the truth exist without resistance. And Clara's voice followed softly. She did not need much, she said, just someone to sit with her. And that was the moment it landed, not as an idea, not as a concept, but as something personal, something undeniable. And Ethan's eyes shifted, past Clara, toward his mother, sitting there quietly, at ease in a way he had not seen in years, not because of where she was, but because of who had stayed beside her, and something inside him tightened, not sharply, not painfully, but enough to be felt, and he exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering, just slightly, as if something he had been holding for years had finally loosened, and for the first time, he did not feel busy, he felt absent, not in the room, not in the moment, but in all the ones that had already passed, and he did not speak it, because he did not need to. It was already there, clear, steady, undeniable, and when he finally looked back at Clara, there was no distance left in his gaze. No calculation, no control, just presence, real and unguarded, and the silence that followed was different now, softer, warmer, as if something had been set down between them, something that no longer needed to be carried. And after a moment, Clara gave a small nod, not as agreement, but as recognition, as if she understood something had changed without needing it explained, and his mother smiled faintly, her hand resting gently against the armrest, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now you see," she said. And Ethan nodded once, slowly, not because he was told, but because he finally did. And the room seemed to breathe with that moment, quiet and full at the same time. And after a while, Clara stepped back slightly, her movement calm, unhurried. "I should go," she said, and Ethan looked at her immediately, not with urgency, but with intention. "You can stay," he replied softly, and Clara's lips curved into a faint smile. "I know," she said again, and this time, the words felt different, not a refusal, but a choice, and Ethan understood that, fully, and he stepped closer, just enough to meet her without closing the space completely. "Then let me walk you down," he said, and Clara hesitated for only a second before nodding, and as they moved toward the door together, his mother's voice followed behind them, gentle, certain. "Do not wait too long this time." And Ethan paused briefly, glancing back, understanding more than the words themselves, then continued forward, and as the elevator doors closed, the city lights reflected softly across the mirrored walls, and for a moment, they stood side by side, not speaking, not needing to, until Ethan glanced at her, just briefly, and said quietly, "You stayed when I did not." And Clara looked at him, her expression unchanged but softer now, and after a second, she replied, just as quietly, "You are here now." And something in that answer settled deeper than anything else that night. And as the elevator began to descend, neither of them looked away, and neither of them needed to say anything more, because sometimes the beginning of something real does not arrive with noise. It arrives in silence, in presence, in the quiet understanding that this time, neither of them is walking away. The elevator moved slowly, almost too slowly, as if even the building itself understood that this moment was not meant to be rushed, and the soft hum beneath their feet blended into the silence between them, a silence that no longer felt uncertain, but settled, earned, and Clara stood beside him, her posture relaxed, her gaze forward, while Ethan watched their reflection in the mirrored wall for just a second longer than necessary, not to check his appearance, not out of habit, but because for the first time, he saw himself differently, not as the man who controlled everything, but as someone who had missed something that could never be bought back, and yet, somehow, had been given another chance to understand it, and he exhaled quietly, the tension that once defined him no longer sitting as heavily in his chest, and without looking away, he spoke, his voice low, steady, but unmistakably real. "I thought being there meant providing everything." And Clara turned her head slightly, not interrupting, not correcting, just listening, the way she always did, and he continued, softer now. "I did not realize it also meant staying." And the words did not sound like regret alone. They sounded like truth finally, finding its place, and Clara's expression shifted just slightly, not surprised, not impressed, just present, and she met his eyes in the reflection, not directly, but enough for the moment to hold. "Most people do not realize," she said quietly, "until someone shows them." And Ethan nodded once, because that was exactly what had happened, not through force, not through loss, but through something far simpler, someone who chose to stay when it was not required, and that difference had changed everything. And as the elevator lights flickered gently across their reflections, the distance between them no longer felt like a gap. It felt like space, space that had been filled not with words, but with understanding. And when the doors finally opened, neither of them moved immediately, not out of hesitation, but because the moment itself felt complete, like something had quietly come full circle without needing acknowledgement. And then Clara stepped forward first, as she always did, not leading, not following, just moving naturally, and Ethan followed beside her, not behind, not ahead, but with her, matching her pace without thinking about it. And as they walked through the quiet lobby, the outside world waiting just beyond the glass doors, the city lights softer now, the air clearer, something subtle but permanent had already changed between them. And when they reached the entrance, Clara paused for a brief second, turning slightly toward him, her expression calm, grounded. "This is where I go back," she said, not as distance, but as truth. And Ethan looked at her, really looked this time, not at her appearance, not at the role she held, but at the person she had always been, steady, present, unshaken by everything around her. And for a moment, he said nothing, because words were no longer the first thing he reached for. And then, quietly, he nodded. "And this is where I start," he replied, and the difference between those two sentences settled gently between them, not separating them, but connecting them in a way neither of them expected, and Clara's lips curved into the faintest smile, the kind that did not ask for anything in return, and she stepped out into the night. The cool air meeting her with the same quiet familiarity it always had, and Ethan remained just inside for a second longer, watching her walk a few steps forward before stopping, as if something in him no longer allowed him to let moments pass without choosing differently. And he stepped outside after her, not calling her name, not rushing, just closing the distance naturally. And when she turned back, it was not surprise that met her expression, it was recognition, and he stopped beside her. Not too close, not too far, just enough, and for a brief second, the city moved around them again, cars passing, lights shifting, life continuing, but neither of them looked away, and neither of them needed to say anything more, because something had already been decided in the quietest way possible. And as they stood there, side by side, not defined by where they came from, not limited by what they had been, but grounded in what they had just chosen, the moment did not feel like an ending. It felt like something far more rare, a beginning that did not need to announce itself, because it was already real. Sometimes, the people who seem to have everything are only missing one thing: the courage to stay when it matters most. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs a reminder like this, and let us know where you are watching from. Subscribe to When He Chose Her channel for more powerful, emotional stories about dignity, truth, and the quiet moments that change everything.